Hello and welcome to the InfoViz lecture on how to structure the story, the narrative that makes up your visualization. Here we're going to learn how to make your point. What that starts with is, what's your visualization's purpose? What is its purpose? It's important to know whether your visualization is exploratory, in that it helps answer user questions. Exploratory visualizations are often things like dashboards that people will check back to regularly because they need to see if something has changed. It could be watching the performance of a server or the performance of the stock market, watching how your business is performing. There's often a lot of checking in on things. The questions are what drive an exploratory visualization, and its purpose is to be able to answer those questions. By contrast, and this is the kind of visualization we'll be doing in the first assignment, you might have an explanatory visualization. Those are about insights. Instead of letting someone explore the data to answer questions that you have in mind, an explanatory visualization is about providing specific insights that you, the designer, know to the user and helping them come to understand it. Its purpose is to explain. So here's an example of, I feel, a explanatory visualization. This is from an article by Inga Ting on the ABC's website recently. Inga Ting is a great data journalist. You should absolutely check out her stuff. And this is part of an article that is showing that Australia's COVID vaccine rollout is thus far very much behind both other countries and our own targets. You would maybe expect Australia not to be first and foremost in the vaccine approval race, because COVID is not currently circulating in a wide way in our community, but we have set our own targets and we've kind of goofed them in the first couple of weeks at least. So this article has a specific purpose. It's trying to communicate how far we are behind everyone else and behind our own goals. And so it shows here, and there's a lot of visualizations in this article, this is just one of them, it shows how well other countries are doing. Australia isn't even on this list of the top 9 or so. By contrast, here's a visualization from the first week's slides. This was showing an energy usage breakdown in the United States, and this didn't have a specific narrative in mind. It was letting you explore. Had let you answer a bunch of questions that you might have about where energy comes from, where it goes, what components of the industries it goes into. But if there really was an overarching kind of insight that the designers here wanted you to take away, it's that it was a many-faceted, very complicated problem, as I explained in that video. It shows that there's no one thing that we can easily do to decarbonize our economies. So it has an insight, but mostly it operates around just letting you explore those questions. And so that's the difference in purpose of the two major kinds of visualization. Once you've got an idea of what your purpose is, you really need to do basic interaction design stuff. In fact, basic human-centered design of anything stuff. And there's a lot of these questions, therefore going to be familiar to those of you who have done, say, interaction design or user experience design in our studios or in some other course. Who's your audience? Now, what are their needs is a fairly familiar question, I would hope, to those of you who've completed the prerequisite courses. But we also have another set of questions that we need to ask of our users. When we talk about what is their knowledge, what's their expertise, what's their skills, there's two kinds of skill set that are relevant to making a visualization. The first one is, what are their skills in whatever the domain of the data is. Like, so if this is about presenting beef imports, then how much does this person actually know about beef imports? And then the second one is, how much do they know about data science, about visualization? If you show them a 7-day rolling average, are they going to understand what that means? If you say these are 95% confidence intervals, are they going to understand what that means? If you show something as a bar chart versus if you show something as a histogram, are they going to be able to follow those ideas? That doesn't necessarily derive from how familiar they are with the content. They might know a ton about the logistics of beef and not know anything about data visualization. And that's something you're going to need to answer in your user research. Here, for example, is a visualization of 60 seconds of activity on, I think it's about 300 machines, although they might not all be visible. I had to crop the screenshot, of course. about 300 machines in a server farm, each of which has exactly 16 CPUs in it. So each pixel represents the CPU utilization of one core in one machine, and then you can see these blocks showing that, you can see the rectangular blocks on this visualization showing the activity of that core over 60 seconds. Now, this is a highly technical visualization, has no explanation around it. Obviously, it would have an interface of some sort to contextualize. This is for system reliability engineers, people who make sure that server farms don't fall over. And what their understanding of both the domain, what's happening in a server farm, and how this data is represented, how it's gathered, what it means, how this data is usually portrayed, is very high. This is their job. They spend their time looking at these things. And they're looking for anomalies, patterns of behavior that stick out. So if you're an experienced SRE, you can look at this kind of chart and you can say, okay, this is a fairly low utilization day. There's not a lot of those red rectangles. Most of these machines are not in heavy use. But there are a couple of single-threaded high load things going on here. You see this bar across there of this this server. One of its cores is fully loaded and most of the others aren't doing anything. That probably indicates that maybe something's stuck. You got a single thread hot load, or you possibly have just an unoptimized program running on there, something that could take better advantage of. You can't answer any of those questions without the specific knowledge of an SRE. And of course, I don't have that knowledge. I'm not a reliability engineer. I've never maintained a server farm. So they would presumably go into a ton more depth observing this and starting to make comments about what's going on. This visualization is for that kind of audience. Contrast it with something like this. There's no less well-designed a visualization. This is intended to inform someone about medical issues, but that person is neither intended to be familiar with data nor intended to be familiar with anything medical. This is just talking about the negative long-term impacts of sitting or standing too much, which we all do now, and certainly have been doing a lot more of since the start of the pandemic. Notice how the data points in this visualization aren't actually even really presented as charts. They tend to be put in the text, like neck pain affects 10% of the world's population each year. That's not shown as a chart. That's just a little insight given to you as words. It's pointed out at a neck to give you an idea of what's going on there. Really, the only kind of mapping that goes on here is to show the long series. You can actually just see the start of it in this visualization. It shows this long series of different things that can happen to you. Sort of this visualization, this infographic, I should call it, is much longer. It shows all the things that can happen to you as you sit or stand still for a much longer period of time. So the next question that we need to ask ourselves is, what is the context in which this app will be viewed? So it's not just who's your audience. It's what mindset are they in at the time? Where are they going to be? How are they going to be consuming this? Is it part of their work, part of their leisure? Is it educational? Is it entertaining? Is it informative? What is this data doing for this person? So what device is it going to be on? Is it going to be something that they see on a desktop, on a mobile? Is it going to be printed? Is it going to be installed in a large-scale institution? A large-scale installation of some sort, I mean. Are they going to see it once? Are they going to just consume this once like an infographic and then have that information available to them maybe for a little while? Are they going to see it a couple of times over the course of a specific product or service, like a specific process? Are they going to engage with it daily as part of their work? All of these questions, in addition to who your user is, inform how you need to think about your data. So you need to capture your thinkings about this in the same way that you do for any other interaction design project. Take a look at this, for example. This is from that Contextual Solar Pulse project that I talked about in the first week's slides. This shows you a mobile data visualization. So we already know it's going to be on a small screen. We can't fit a lot of stuff in one place. And it's going to have repeated engagement because someone is going to want to check in on how their how their solar installation is going. And it's going to be likely at home. But the people who engage with this are not necessarily going to be data professionals. but they're more likely to be the part of Clipsel's customer base who do care about the specifics. Hey, right now, I'm at 5.5 kilowatts from the panels. That's the highest it's been since May last year. They're going to be that kind of user, that kind of vibe. The others are not that likely to check in on this app, even if they have installed it. Maybe they're only going to look at how much money did I save this year, the top line stuff. So again, as is always, you guys have done other design studios at this point. You've just done design methods courses. You understand all of this stuff. The extra thing we have to think about is the data. How are these user needs going to be fulfilled with the data that we have? But also, are our users going to be capable of digesting those user needs? Here's another example. This, maybe you'd see it on a PC. This is a classic visualization, a classic infographic. It's been around for a really long time, some version of this, visualizing all the different kinds of coffee. It really took off in the US with the dawn of third wave coffee back maybe 8 to 10 years ago, as you started to see coffee shops that actually knew what they were doing showing up, and people starting to take an artistic as opposed to craft-based approach to espresso-based beverages. And not just espresso, they've really moved into drip and siphon and you know what, it's probably not that important for me to establish my coffee nerd credentials here. Coffee's great. This could be seen on a PC screen, maybe on print, like as a poster or something or other. It's likely going to be explored once as kind of a leisure/fun entertainment activity, and then probably discarded. Now we come to probably the most specific question when you're trying to understand how your visualization will make its point. What do you have? What are the columns? Like, what are the variables that you'll be using in your data set? What are the ones that you have? Maybe which ones do you have to calculate if you need to average or something like that? Are they categorical? Are they numeric? We talked about that in the mapping video. You also need to know what's the shape of your data. Like, what does it actually look like? Where do the values cluster? Where do they tend to be? At the moment, I'd encourage you to think about that by doing simple charts of them. Just grab the data in Excel or something and then just have a look at it. Just make a line chart or whatever. Later on in the course, when we get into a bit of data processing stuff, we'll start to look at more statistical ways of doing that, looking at means and standard deviations and quartiles and other measures of central tendency. But for now, I think it's just interesting to think about what are the ranges, where is most of the data, roughly what shape does it have. It'll give you a better head when you're trying to do sketches. Is there any missing? There's no perfect data. In fact, for assignment 1 that there'll be a video on soon, there were a couple of days missing from the data set, and I had to actually fill those in, just interpolate between the two missing dates, just because I didn't want you guys to have to deal with this yet. But in the real world, there's almost always some range of data where things are missing, or at this date, the format changed, so you need to do some calculation to make the two line up. Nothing is ever as neat as it's going to be in the assignments, at least the first couple. This last one about the arity of the relationships is actually something that many of you, if you haven't done like a databases course or something, might find a little bit confusing. But sometimes your data isn't easily available as a simple table, where each row, which might be a person, has one entry in each column. Sometimes there's many-to-one relationships, like many students are in one class, or many-to-many relationships, so many students take many units of study, but each student is only in one degree. Now, if you start to look at all of that data, you're going to get a lot of duplication if you try and flatten it out into one table. And so those attributes are going to look very, very different. Sometimes you can treat them as categories, sometimes you can't. There's a whole world of how to treat relational databases. You can take a databases unit if that's important for you. But for this course, it's just important to know, is this a one-to-one thing? Is it one-to-many? And how does that affect the decisions that you make when you come to visualize some of this stuff? So I think it's interesting to do like a data summary to have a page or so where you just write out what are the variables that are available, what are the ranges of them, what are their rough shapes. You can sketch out a little chart or something rather, or just do this in Excel. You give everything a label, like this is categorical data. It ranges from child to senior, something like that. This is numerical data. It's continuous. It ranges from -1 to +5, with most of the range between, let's say, 1 and 3. So you just put together that summary, because then when you start doing your sketching, when you start actually coming up with the concept for your visualization, you'll actually know what you're doing. After a while, you might be able to internalize some of these things. After you've made a bunch of visualizations, you can just sort of know in your head what something's going to look like. But there's no reason to try and jump to that. Waste paper, save brain cells. Put together something, put together a summary of your data, and use that just like you'd use the findings of any user research process. In interaction design, you always need some kind of summary, some kind of synthesis out of all the user research that you did. Well, in InfoVis, we just add an extra 1 or 2 to that. We also need a summary of what data is available. We also need a summary of what's the purpose that we're trying to explain or explore. So, you have your data. You have your audience. You have your context. You have your purpose. You know what you're trying to explain or what you're trying to explore. What do you do next? You tell a story. That's how you make your point. That's the purpose of this video, exploring how can we get from all of this, what I would consider user research and data research stuff, to a story. I think the best way to do that is to think about those questions or insights from way back at the top of this video when we talked about purpose. If you're designing, say, a dashboard, then you're going to be focused on your purpose can be expressed in terms of questions your users have. If you've got an exploratory visualization like a dashboard, then what you're trying to do is help people answer questions that they may have every day in the office, or once when they're choosing which of your products to purchase or something or other. And you take those questions and you say, which are the main questions? How do I lay them out? Can I group them together? Are there clear groupings of questions that show me that I need a screen that answers this group and then a screen that answers this group? Or are all the questions separate? Do I need a whole bunch of different layouts for each one? Is there really one super important question that almost all of my users are here for, and the others are kind of drill downs that only a small fraction of my users might want to come to? You take those questions and you can now start to put together a concept for what your dashboard is. But maybe more relevant to you right now is what happens if you've got a more explanatory kind of visualization, because that's what we're going to be doing in our first assignment. For that kind of thing, for an infographic or some kind of data journalism, then what you do is you say, okay, what's the big insight? What's the big key takeaway? When this visualization succeeds, what has surprised people? What do people go away thinking, wow, I didn't realize how common human trafficking is. I didn't realize how effective masks were against COVID. I didn't realize how many carbon emissions come from the transfer of power rather than its generation. I didn't realize how many cars are still running grandfathered into old versions of the emissions regulations. I didn't realize what percentage of people were doing remote learning even before COVID started. All of these things are the big takeaways, the big surprises, the big discoveries that make a really great infographic. If you don't learn anything from an infographic, and if you're not surprised or engaged by its insights, it was a bit crap. So now you've got that now you've got that insight. How do you build up to it? What do you prepare people for? What are the stages that someone needs to go through? What are the things that they need to build towards to be in the right mindset to be wowed by your big insight? And this, I think, is helpful to think of as a journey. And we actually have a good design method for handling journeys. You may be experienced with customer journey maps. You may not have done them before. In either case, I don't think we need necessarily all of this, but it's helpful to look at some of it. You can see along the top there are the stages of engaging with an experience. In a traditional journey map, those are the stages of engaging with your product, becoming aware of it, thinking about it, making a decision, buying it, getting it delivered, becoming a loyal advocate for it later on if they loved it. And you want to track a customer through that journey. For a visualization, it's the same thing, but the journey looks a little bit different. We're interested in when they first become aware of the infographic or the visualization. Then what do they see first? What do they think they're going to get? What are their expectations? And then what do they go to after that? What's the first thing they digest? What's the thing that hooks them and keeps them going? And then what's the big reveal? And then what's the call to action or the output after they've gone through your thing? And it's interesting to think about their experience, what are their emotional states, tracking it maybe and this one uses a univariate way of tracking it, like how interested, how engaged are they, how surprised are they. You can use a lot of different dimensions as appropriate for your visualization. But I find it useful to plot out the experience that someone's going through as a journey, because that's really the narrative. That's the thing that makes it a story. When we say storytelling with data, that's the narrative there. That's the journey that they go through, the discoveries that they make, the things that they realize, the tension that they have, the surprise that they get from your visualization. I mean, I'm sorry if I'm nerding out about this too much. But once you have that narrative, which is built on your user research and your summary of the data, once you have your purpose, your context, your audience, your data summary, and then an understanding of the underlying insight or the key questions that you want someone to go away with, it's time to start sketching. So that's how to make your point. It's our first foray into how to apply design methods to making a story out of your visualization. I hope this video is helpful for those of you who are thinking about tackling assignment 1. I'd encourage you to come back to it when you actually do start assignment 1, if you're just watching it now in week 2. I'll see you in the next couple of videos. We're going to have a little summary of assignment 1 itself. We're going to cover a fun topic, chart junk. I'll see you in class.